I said, honey, it's okay. Like, I've got a plan. I'm going to start a business teaching lawyers how to use Twitter. And, you know, she just cried harder. But
I was going to ask, what was her response to that?
So
Welcome to Hello Grow,
the #1 growth podcast in the world.
I'm Court Brady.
nice, impressive.
This is my co-host, Carlos Souza. And today we have Adrian Dayton on episode 23, which means you're Michael Jordan. So you are the GOAT of anyone who's ever been on our podcast.
Wow.
And I'm stoked to have you. A quick intro so that everyone knows. Adrian's an attorney, so I don't know how he's on our entrepreneurial sales leader podcast, because that does not make any sense to me. But then converted to entrepreneur, did a few things in between. You've written for Forbes. You've done all these amazing things, but I feel like you have a few stages: lawyer, entrepreneur, multi-million-dollar exit, now business coach, and meditator.
Yeah, that's pretty much sums up my entire life story. I guess we can just end the podcast, right?
So we're going to have two parts to this podcast. We want to go through your journey. We want to talk about how you made all these decisions to switch. Like, those are drastic switches. And then after that, because you've grown a SaaS company from zero to multi-million-dollar exit, we want to talk about how somebody could go and copy and replicate what you did, what you learned that you would do again, and what you learned that you would avoid doing.
Yeah, sounds great.
Go about it again. So before we get too far in, there's a quote by Elon Musk where he talks about a startup or owning a company being like staring into the abyss while chewing on glass. So looking back at your journey up to this point, whether that was through law school, post-graduation, or as an entrepreneur or as a business coach, could we just get deep fast and talk about one of those experiences for you, chewing on glass, staring into the abyss?
Yeah, I mean, I remember this moment in Clearview Social. We were about 4 years in. We had some good traction. We had brought on a COO who was a Harvard Business School graduate. And then my kind of executive assistant, my right hand, went on maternity leave. And the operations person had dropped some major balls on invoicing a few key clients and not moving money and not really managing the cash situation. So all of a sudden, we were completely out of cash, and it was time to make payroll.
4 years in.
Yeah, 4 years in. And my lead engineer, who had been with me almost since the beginning, he saw the books and he said, look, I love all the employees too much. Like, we've had to have a couple of deep cuts since I've been here, and like, I can't go through this again. So he kind of said, like, I'm out. And I let the COO go. And I still remember talking to a coach. At the time, I was being coached by Dan Martell, who's amazing businessman, and just telling him about, like, look, the cash was mismanaged by this person. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, that mother effer, and like, I don't swear, right? So I was like made me feel good that he was calling someone a mother effer, because I would never do that, you know. But like, it was like it was like a nice release. And he just said to me, he said, like this is it. Like, you are in it. Like, this is what it is to be an entrepreneur. And I just thought about that moment so many times, that like, if you want easy, if you want smooth, if you want, you know, an organized path to development, like, that is not entrepreneurship, you know? And man, but I love it, because when you put in front of yourself challenges and unexpected twists and turns, the one thing you're guaranteed is growth. And my period as an entrepreneur, especially that first 5 years, when I was so desperate for success, I was reading every book I could find. I was finding every coach. I was going to the conferences. I was just doing everything I could to give myself just a little bit of an edge so I wouldn't fail. And man, like, that was a fun period of my life. But also, I don't want to go back. I don't want to do it again. I mean, it was terrible. But I look back at it and it was just a massive period of growth, personally.
Thanks for sharing that. Can't believe you know Dan Martell. I'm reading Buy Back Your Time right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, great book.
Phenomenal book.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. Let's go through why you decided to be a lawyer.
Okay. So I was sitting in church. Am I allowed to mention church here? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, good. All right. So I was sitting in church, and it was actually this ward just for single members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my bishop was telling a story about how his father had 12 kids. And even though he was a doctor, he went back to school to get a psychiatry degree so that he could make more money to support his 12 kids. And I was listening to this story, and I was just thinking, man, more education. I already knew I was an entrepreneur, but I was like, if I get more education, that will give me an edge that will make me a better entrepreneur. And it was like this lightning bolt moment. Like, I went to church that day with no intention of going to law school, and I left church like, I'm definitely going to law school. I'm going to go right away. Like, the next week, I signed up for a bar prep class, took the LSAT, took the LSAT, and the next fall I started law school. So law school for me was never about becoming a lawyer. It was always about what's a unique skill that would make me a more attractive partner as an entrepreneur. And ironically, I did really well in law school. I got married and had a kid by the end. And so I got offered a job at a big law firm. And I just thought, well, the nice thing about law firms is they do give you healthcare benefits. And my wife likes those, And so I took this job, and I was like miserable from almost the first day, because lawyers are really great at solving complex problems. If it's not really hard to solve and really complex, then they're not going to hire a lawyer. People are just going to look up on Google and find the answer, right? And so imagine if your job all day is to spend 8 hours doing brain teasers. For some people, they love that, But it's like the head of my corporate department, when I started at the firm, I went in to talk to him, because I'm a networker. I want to get to know everyone, right? So I go into, and he's just kind of got these little glasses, and he's very serious corporate lawyer, very buttoned up, And I'm his name's Peter.
I have this person guy, right? From Indiana Jones. Does he have a German accent?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So he almost looks like the Indiana Jones guy, right? And I go into him and I say, Peter, I would love for us to find a time to grab lunch in the next couple weeks. And he looks at me and he says, I bring my lunch. And it was the end of the conversation. It didn't occur to him that there might be some other purpose besides eating, right? But anyway, so very early on, I realized, and I was miserable as a lawyer. And the plan was, look, I'll do some corporate M&A deals for 2-3 years. That'll be great experience to bring into the business world, right? Kind of like my original vision. I want to be ready to be a great entrepreneur. And then two things happened at the same time. This kind of culmination of events. Number one, I'd written a manuscript as I was preparing for the bar. And you have a couple months before you can join the firm after taking the bar. So I wrote this book about virtues and how you could develop in 12 months, 12 new virtues in your life. So I wrote this manuscript, and I met with a few PR people and publishers, and they said, well, you have to have a name. You have to have a reputation, And one of my good buddies said, actually Brian Watkins, but he's best friends with my brother. He said, there's this new site called Twitter. You really should check it out. It's a great way that you could kind of build your reputation. Now, I know you're all thinking oh, we've heard of Twitter, but at that time, there were less than 4 million users of Twitter worldwide.
Wow.
But it was so new and different. So I was like, well, I have nothing else to do. The work was slowing down at my firm because it was it was just starting to hit the downturn, right? You had Lehman Brothers fall. This is the winter of 2008, right? Fall into December of 2008. So I didn't have that much work to do. So I got on Twitter and I learned everything about it. And I just went down this rabbit hole. And within a few months, look, Twitter's not that complicated, but I was an expert on how to build followings, on how to grow your brand, on how to do this stuff, right? And so I'm thinking oh, maybe there could be a business here. But I also because of Twitter, I was able to get Deseret News to agree to publish my book. And anyway, and then March of 2009 hits, and my firm that's been around 100 years, and their 100 years of history, have never done layoffs. You know, they just told the newspaper that 2 weeks before, you know. The same head of corporate department comes to my office with a German accent. No German accent, but, you know, and he says, you know,
we are here to lay you off.
Yeah. So I always joke that he shared with me a few words I'll never forget. He said, "You're fired," you know. And but what is true is I called my wife, and she was crying. I mean, we had a new baby at home. We had all these student loans. And I said, "Honey, it's okay. Like, I've got a plan. I'm going to start a business teaching lawyers how to use Twitter." And, you know, she just cried harder. But
I was going to ask, what was her response to that?
So she actually was very supportive. So look, the plan was to practice law for 2 to 3 years and then go out into the business world. But I just got moved up way faster. And it's interesting, like, even when I lost my job, I wasn't like, okay, I'm going to start my own thing, because I was terrified of not having a paycheck, of all my expenses. I mean, it was this moment of decision. And there's actually a great local company in town here that's had a great exit since, that actually offered me a job immediately, like the week after I lost my job.
A law firm?
No, a startup called Imagine Learning, started by Darren Hill, that now runs Rev Road, you know. And I interviewed them. They offered me the job. I verbally accepted. And I remember one night, and I was still in Buffalo. I had to fly out the next week for my training to start this new job. And I was reading the book Tribes by Seth Godin. I don't know if you ever read any Seth Godin, like the most brilliant marketing mind. He's amazing. Oh yeah, there you go. You got some Seth Godin there. So in Tribes, he basically, you know, Seth Godin is really good at kind of seeing trends. And he says, look, social media is already creating all these tribes, not by ethnicity or by nation or by, right? They're tribes of people that have similar interests. So he said, but the formation of tribes doesn't necessarily create leaders. And so the book was like a call to action saying, look, these tribes are forming. You have a chance to stand up and lead them. And so I read this book, I finished it, I put it down, and I thought I could lead the entire legal industry on how they use social media. And I was inspired. And I still remember this moment, driving down the road with my wife. We were coming back from Canada after visiting some friends. And I said, you know, Natalie, this new job is going to be really good for me. The one here in Salt Lake, right? They're going to give me health insurance benefits. They're going to give me a cell phone. They're going to give me a laptop. They're going to give me a projector. And on the projector, that's where she was like, whoa, a projector? Like, she's like, are you trying to convince me you should take this job? Or are you trying to convince yourself? And she said, if you don't want to take this job, if you want to start your own thing, like, I fully will support you in that.
It's amazing.
And like, I literally had I was at this turning point where I had 2 roads I could choose. I could choose the safe road where it was known exactly where it went, or I could choose the unknown and choose adventure. And like, choosing adventure in that moment, like, that's one decision that completely changed my life.
We're gonna do a little pivot. Instead of breaking this into 2 sections, your story and then advice you'd give, let's just talk about your story throughout this.
Okay, sure. However you want.
We're going to go through for other entrepreneurs when they come up with their idea. How do they know if it's the right idea or not? So I want to ask you that question. What advice do you give to other entrepreneurs that are trying to get their idea? Maybe they're doing a little opposite of you. They have a job and they know they want to be an entrepreneur, but they're just waiting on that idea. Yeah.
So I've had a lot of people say to me, you know, they know I'm an entrepreneur. And so they'll say to me, hey, Adrian, we should get together and brainstorm ideas. Right? Have you had people ask you this before? Right? Like, and it's very well-meaning, but the reality is nobody dreams up businesses. What people do is they identify unmet needs, right? So it's like, I've never been an inventor. I've always been an opportunist. Right? When I started creating, when I wrote the first book on social media for lawyers, there were 1 million lawyers out there who had no clue what to do with social media. Was it ethical? How could it be used to bring in clients? Like, how could they make sure not to miss out on this wave, right? And so there was an information asymmetry. I had all this information, and they had none. And so I thought, you know what? I should be the delivery mechanism for this information, but I don't want to give it to all the lawyers. What I do, I want to give it to the ones that are willing to pay the most for it. And so really, I mean, for me, my first business was actually a consulting business to law firms. And it was who would pay the most to learn what I know. And so I got a handful of large law firms, and they took basically like classes of 12 or 15 lawyers that I would work with. I would coach all of them once a month, and then I'd do one group lesson once a month with them as well. And basically I'd get them on a retainer, like paying me to work with these groups of lawyers. And so once I had 3 or 4 law firms where I had kind of a group with each law firm, here it was like right out of law school. And I was making like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a month, coaching these groups. So, like I didn't invent this social media thing. I was just in the right place at the right time, right? And then I figured out, I just asked the question, who's going to pay me the most per hour to do this work? So that was my first business. But even as I started that, and I still remember when I got my first check, so I got laid off as a lawyer in March of 2009. I got my first payday in my new business in December of that same year, right? I had made enough money doing some little things just to pay our mortgage. But it's my first check I got was 15 grand. And it was just amazing. Okay, I found something I can give that people will pay for. So the first question is to ask is, what is the problem people have that they need help with? And the second one is, can they afford to pay to solve it, right? And so even at that first, when I'm okay, I went and gave services, they gave me money. From that first month, I thought, but I gotta find a way for them to give me money without me doing any work, right? And I didn't want to get away with no work, but from the beginning, it started turning in my head. I need to find a way for them to pay me on a monthly basis in a recurring fashion, And it took me almost 4 years to come up with the idea that would become my first software business. But it was all about figuring out what's a common problem they all have that they would pay on a regular basis to be fixed. And what I realized is I was working with all these groups of lawyers. I was helping them develop their brands. I was helping them start blogging. Some of them starting podcasts even back then, and basically creating a name for themselves. This whole idea of personal branding, that wasn't even really a thing back then. That was a new concept, But you'd have, in a firm of 100 lawyers, you'd have 4 or 5 people that are doing a great job creating content. But you've got 95 other lawyers that they all have, by this time, almost all of them have LinkedIn accounts. None of them are sharing that content. So I created software to make it easy so that the masses at the firms could share that content out to social media. And we created leaderboards and gamified it and made it kind of fun and interesting for them, and showed them we even showed them the dollar value of the exposure they were getting by sharing, But anyway, so that's the kind of the evolution of how my business came about.
That's so cool. I have a question. So you mentioned that you're not a creator, you're an opportunist.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned that you were at this crossroad where you had you could choose the safe job in Utah, or you could go on this adventure, right?
Yeah.
What sets those two groups apart? Because there's a lot of people that are listening to this. They're sitting on, at their desk, at their 9 to 5. They're having these dreams and there's these ideas, but they're just not taking action on them. What set you apart, and what made you jump at the opportunity, and what do you think holds people back?
Okay, so there's one thing. I was just talking to my older brother about this morning, but at that moment in time, it wasn't just that I had the guts to do my own thing. It's that I saw this dissymmetry, right? I had information that other people didn't. I could lead this tribe. It was an opportunity where I saw an unfair advantage. And we only want to go into business if we have an unfair advantage, right? I mean, anybody that wants to could go out and start a cookie company, right? But not only is it really hard, there's tons of competitors now, right? Like you've got Crumble, you've got Dirty Dough, you've got all these competitors. And so if you're one of those people that's working a day job and you're like, oh, if only I had the guts to quit my day job and start a cookie business, it's like probably stay in your job, right? Like you got to find what is it you could do that's unique, new, or different to solve an unmet need, right? To do something no one else is doing. Because I was first, you know, I was the first social media for lawyers guy or professional. I could charge more than anyone else, and I could get the best customers because I wasn't competing with anybody, you know? And then 3 years later, once people started to come out of the woodwork and try to compete with me, it was kind of too late. Like I had a huge advantage. I'd already written a couple books. I was a weekly columnist for the National Law Journal, right? And so what I would say is if you have a compelling vision and an idea that you think has not yet been done, right? Or you have a unique spin on it, like you have to decide, do you have the risk tolerance to lay it on the line? But my wife, she was just so fascinated. She was like, she didn't think I was a very hard worker until
That surprises me.
Until she saw me start my own thing. Because the truth is, like, I mean, don't tell anyone, but I am not a great employee, right? I mean,
we know that's why you're an entrepreneur.
That's why I'm an entrepreneur. But like, I crushed it when I was a car salesman because it was all commissions, right? Like, #1 car salesman because it was just a lever, right? I sell cars, they pay me money, right? But this whole idea of like putting in FaceTime, like, yeah, well, you gotta stay late. Like, no, like, forget about it. Like, even as the boss, I didn't like the idea of FaceTime. I mean, like at my company, and this is just a little bit about like company culture, is we created a scorecard and everyone had numbers they were in charge of driving. And if you're hitting your numbers, I don't care if we never saw you, right? I don't care if you took vacation all the time because the numbers are what we care about. Now, it's very rare that someone hits their numbers without doing any work, but that's not the point. The point is like, dude, take Friday off, take Monday off, take 3 weeks off, but you're still expected to hit your numbers, you know? And that's, and I never had anyone manage me that way.
I think it's typical to have successful companies emerge from service companies. And I think that's a good in-between for people that maybe want to dip their toe in entrepreneurship, but aren't ready to say, okay, I got to go develop this project. I got to work with the manufacturer. I got to pay this coder to go do this thing. I know that I'm good at this and I can get some people to pay me to do that. And then in the course of doing that, you see, oh, there's this way to automate it, and you get new insights that give you the next step. Yeah. Is that what happened with Clearview? And could you tell us about that transition from consulting to software?
Really what happened, like what lit the biggest fire for me is I'd been going about 3.5 years with my consulting business. Like my house was paid off. Like life was good. Like by a lot of outside measures, it was like, I could just keep doing this forever. Like I was making great money. I was out of debt. And then this startup came to a legal conference, and the company's name was People Links. And they invited me out to their headquarters in Philadelphia. And I went out to visit, and they just got a check for like $7 million to build their company. That was their first, that was like their, you know, it was like their Series seed check was like $7 million.
Seed?
Yeah, like it was their first check, you know?
Wow.
Yeah. So this is back in like crazy time, right? And they had all their offices were glass. And they had like the foosball table and the big beanbag chairs and a room full of snacks. And they had a screen with a loop of surfers playing all the time, right? And everyone was like cool. And they're like, hey, are you going to go do spinning during lunch? Yeah, I'm totally going spinning during lunch. And I was just like.
They had mushrooms on their shirt?
And they didn't have mushrooms on the shirt. But I was just like, wow, like these people. And then, so I was there the whole day. They wanted me to join them and basically help them take the legal industry by storm with their product, right? And so I met their 2 co-founders, really nice guys. One of them's now a girl, but that's a different story. But so really nice. And I see them do an onboarding and how they train a company on the new software that they just launched. And I do training, and their training is trash. And I'm like, and their product is like, it's okay. And they want me to join them, and they want me to beg for like a path to earn 1% of their company. And I'm like, dude, like, I'm as smart or smarter than these guys. I don't want to join them. Like, I want to beat them, you know? And so I came home from that. I hired some developers to build the first prototype for my software. And at that point, I didn't even know what the product was. In fact, our company's name was Clearview Social. Our product originally was like a dashboard, like a Power BI dashboard of marketing data, because like I love that stuff. Turns out marketers don't really care that much about that stuff, at least then. So it evolved into, right, like, so you know, one question that you asked me in preparation for this meeting is how do you find product market fit, right? And there's one answer, that is you have to test, right? So we created some images of what we wanted to build, and we pitched it to firms. And they're like, no, that's kind of cool. Would you pay for it? No, probably not. And we had a handful of firms, they didn't care what I built. They're like, we'll pilot anything you try, right? Just because they liked me, they knew that I had good insights. But when I knew I was onto something, when we came up with this idea of this one-click sharing, I created just 4 PowerPoint slides. And it was like, here's what the email looks like that you get. Here's the button you push. Here's what happens on social media. And I was at a conference, and just some of the people I knew, like I knew a lot of like the high up marketers. I just was like, had my iPad like, so does this and this and this, like, would you be interested in that? And like every one of them was like, that would be amazing. Like we would buy that right now. And so then it was just like off to the races. So using those slides, we sold our first half dozen clients before we even had a product. And they weren't paying yet, but right, like they were going to launch as soon as the product was out by whatever, March of the next year. And then using those pre-sales, I was able to go to some angels and raise some more money. And, you know, like we started out with about $400,000, and, you know, that's what we ran on for about our first year. Then we raised another $1 million. But, you know, but the product, like right from the start, the product was decent. And this is one thing that people that aren't in software don't understand, is like software is never done, right? Like that first version was clunky. It was pretty crappy. And then it just kept getting better, right? Up until, you know, I stepped down from the company, you know, almost 10 years in, like it was always getting better. Just because you learn and you can improve. And, but really after a year or two, we had a product that was good enough, you know, that at one point we had almost a third of the top 100 law firms in the country using our software.
Wow.
And the next closest competitor behind us maybe had 4 or 5 firms, you know.
Did you ever talk to those co-founders again?
Well, it's kind of funny. They built a product that was highly dependent on advanced access to LinkedIn's API. And they violated some of the terms of the API.
I read about this. That was this company.
That was this company. So they were cut off. And then eventually they got back some more limited access. But it was kind of like that was the end of like whoever invested $7 million lost all of their money on it pretty much. But we only used the basic API access for our software, which like there's literally like tens of thousands of companies that do that. Yeah. And so we knew there was always a risk. If they ever just decided to shut us down, then it would be catastrophic to our business. But we made sure that we always followed the guidelines, and there wasn't really a problem with that. So
I'm very interested in the details of those conversations. So let's say I am an entrepreneur. I have this software, this idea that I have, and I strongly believe that there's product market fit.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to build the software, but I don't want to go and sell because I don't want to what if I sell too much and I can't deliver?
Yeah.
You know, that limbo of I have an idea, I believe that there's a market for this, but I need proof. So I need to go to customers, go to market and get customers to want the product. Yeah. But I also am afraid of selling because what if they want to buy it and I don't have a product?
Okay, so here's the great thing. There are, in every market, there's 10% of your buyers that are innovators. Okay. What that means is like they just love new stuff. Like they want to talk about it. They want to buy it. Doesn't even have to work. They just want to be first, you know? So when you go to those people and say, like, what if I could create a spaceship that could take you to Mars? They'll just be like, yes, we're in. Like, we definitely want to do that. Like, I don't care what it costs. Like, we want to do that. So the question you need to ask is, and this is a question that product managers ask every single day, and that is, what's the most amount of learning we can get for the least amount of effort? So if you think about, like, I'm not a designer even, so I had to have someone else draw the pictures of those slides, right? And I didn't tell the people this software doesn't exist yet. I said, here's the software, check it out, right? And I just showed them a few slides because I'm just trying to learn, right? And you know, sometimes we make the mistake of saying like, hey, what do you think about this? Oh, we really like it. Well, would you pay for it? What would you pay for it? Who would you have to talk to get it approved, right? Can we show this to them, right? So you're trying to, every step along this way of learning, you're trying to de-risk yourself, right? Mm-hmm. De-risk, right? Like, you know, like years ago, you know, Pepsi came out with like clear Pepsi, you know, such a stupid idea, right? It was probably before your time. Came out with clear Pepsi. Anyway, they spent $1 billion on it, but, you know, they didn't do any work to validate that it was going to work, that it was going to be successful before launching it, right? And there's tons of corporate examples of this, of products that just like, with no real validation, massive money's put behind. But look, we aren't giant corporations, right? Most people creating a startup, it will be the single biggest financial risk of their life. So you're going to want to validate, right? You're going to want to talk to people. So I wouldn't worry about what if they wanted it, it's not built yet. Like, best case scenario, they want it, even though it's not built yet, right? Like, that's what you're hoping for. That's a win. Great question, though.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
So tell me about the team that you built and the role that they played in your success. It sounds like you eventually hired a COO from Harvard.
I hired, in my time at Clearview Social, I hired two different, one Harvard Business School, one Wharton, and then Harvard Law School graduate. And they say you can always tell a Harvard man, you just can't tell them much. No, I'm just kidding. But both of them, I've stayed friends with. They're both great people. Neither of them were good fits for my startup.
Why is that?
And look, and it's not even about them. It's about what our needs were, right? Like, you know, the most recent Harvard grad that we hired, he was an amazing leader, had great personality, and would have been an awesome CEO to run the company. But I was the CEO. We needed someone to handle operations. And it's just like, that wasn't the person's skill set, right? And so this is, you know, we talk about having the right people in the right seats. So I'll talk to you about our team in a second. But before that, I'll tell you about one mistake I made over and over again, and now I direct my clients not to make, which is sometimes we meet someone very talented and we're like, this person is so good, we want them on our team, okay? It's what the book Who by Jeff Smart calls. Do you have that book? Anyway, one of my all-time favorites. Probably top 10 book I recommend. You. Yeah. So in Who by Jeff Smart. No, I'm just kidding. So in this book, they talk about this concept of the all-around athlete. Like, oh, the person does video. Ooh, they can do podcasts. It's like, it's irrelevant. All that really matters is like, are they going to make sure the credit card bill gets paid on time, right? So we had this amazing integrator named Lindsay, still to this day one of my dear friends. She cost a fraction of the Harvard Business School person's cost, but she never missed, you know, payroll. and you know, and so it was just a mismatch in terms of, I was like so starstruck, like, oh, this Harvard Business School graduate wants to work for me? Like, cool. Like that, like we're successful, you know? When what I should have been asking is, like, what exactly do I need and can this person provide?
I've done that so many times on the capital raise and on the key hire. Like, oh, this PE or this VC, wants to invest in me, like, okay, let's go down this route. Like, okay, what are you gonna do with the money?
Right.
I have no idea. Like,
Yeah, but they like
time.
me. Yeah,
They
yeah,
like me, and so this big gold star on my chest.
Right.
That doesn't
Right.
actually mean anything.
Yeah. So in terms of team, the number one question you need to ask when you're hiring someone is, are they great at doing the job that needs to be done? Right. And then the second question you need to ask is, are they a good fit for the company's culture and values?
What if they're a yes on one of those, a resounding yes on one of those, and a on the other? Like, pretty good, but
Well, look.
In either order.
Okay, so, and I know this is like language that you're familiar with from Who, but when we talk about people that are a great culture fit, you know, they're the right person because everyone loves working with them. Everyone loves to be with them. That's great. And the truth is, if someone's a culture fit, you can't coach that. That's great. Okay. But then the other thing is, like, are they good at their job? Are they in the right seat? And if they're not in the right seat, look, if they're a great culture fit, maybe they can move seats. One of the best employees we ever had at Clearview Social, his name was Mike. And Mike started out in sales, and everyone loved Mike. Like, Mike was all time. We loved to be around Mike. At this point in time, he was very early in his career. He wasn't quite at the level where he could sell to these sophisticated lawyers and law firms, you know? And we had to make a change. We hired 3 salespeople. We were only going to keep 1. So we kept 1, and we said to Mike, look, we love you, Mike. Will you help us out in customer success? Because our head of customer success is going to go out on maternity leave in a few months. Like, we would love to have you in customer success. Anyway, as the company grew, he ended up running that whole department, ended up being a member of the executive team, and he was awesome because he was the right person. He just needed to be in a different seat, okay? Now, the opposite isn't true, and I have an example of this. You have someone who's great at their job, okay? We had an awesome salesperson that was super fun to be around, and he always hit his numbers. Well, he sometimes hit his numbers. But he just didn't want to play ball. He didn't want to culturally do what was expected of him. He wouldn't
What does that
be,
mean?
he
Can
wouldn't
you articulate that?
Okay, so he wouldn't be an example to the rest of the team. Like, he wouldn't come in and do his calls. He wouldn't come to meetings if they weren't like absolutely required. And, you know, and sometimes he'd roll in at 1 or 2 in the afternoon and be like, I was just fishing, which if he was crushing his numbers, like I said, I wouldn't say anything, but he was just kind of inconsistent, you know? And so it was like, and look, almost every employee I ever had, I absolutely loved. Like, that's this reality is, like, as a CEO, you love the people you hire, but that has nothing to do with whether or not they're the right fit for the position. And, like, separating that out was kind of painful for me at first until actually I hired a dear friend, and culturally, great fit. Everyone loved them, but they were at a very high level, so there wasn't really a different seat for them in the company. And they were not performing well at their job. And I was so, like, sick about having to let them go because they were a dear friend, that I went and, like, looked on YouTube for, like, some help, some videos. Like, what? How can I make this easier?
You would have asked ChatGPT.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it wasn't around yet, right? We didn't have these fandangled ChatGPTs you have now. So I stumbled upon this video that's totally changed the way I thought about firing people. And basically in the talk, the guy says, look, if somebody in your company is a low performer, nobody thinks they're the worst. Nobody thinks they're the worst employee in the company, right? Although we all know clearly they're sometimes the worst employee, right? But even if they don't think they're the worst, they might think they're middle of the pack. They might think they're a little above middle. They know they're not a star. And nobody wants to be at a company where they're not a star. And if they're in the wrong seat at your company and they're not a star, you got to let them go. You got to help them find a place where they can be a star. I know that may sound just like speak to make you feel better about firing the person, but it's just true. Like, every person we've let go because they weren't a good fit has gone on to find someplace else where they crushed it. You know, when I moved Mike into customer success, there was another salesperson who we just had to let go. And his name's Jeff. He was a freaking hard worker. He was making all of his dials. He just couldn't connect on the intellectual level. Or I don't know what it was, right? He couldn't make the sale with these big law firms, you know? He went on to go work for the local like TV station and has been like their number one salesperson ever since. Right? Like he is a star there. He just couldn't be a star for us, you know? So here's the thing. So when I say star, the other term they use is an A player, right? Someone that's in the right seat and they're the right person, right? I just talked to a CEO of a massive manufacturing company on my way here. And, you know, he has this high-level manager that's been with him for years. And because of personal issues, they finally had to let this person go. And it's like, I've been working with them for almost 2 years, and we both knew he was not an A player. He was not a star. But he did a lot of work, you know, and it's like we make these excuses for accepting B players. Like, well, it'd be a hassle. Maybe the other person we find would be worse. But what I see more often than not, when we have a B player that we let sit around, hang around, even though culturally they're not a fit or they're not living up to our standards, when we finally cut that person loose, we realized they weren't a B player. We realized they were a C player. They did a really good job of covering up for their mistakes, you know? And but even worse is they're taking a seat that an A player could sit in. And an A player is not 10% better than a B player. An A player is 3 times, right, the performance of a B player. So, you know, that's what I learned with my team is, you know, when you find, it took us about 5 years to put together our team of A players. And then once we found them, I treated those A players like gold. And so, like, let me tell you specifically what that means. If I have an A player and I know that the success of my company depends on this person, I'm going to let them know all the time how much I appreciate them, how much I love them. I'm going to sit them down for their evaluation. And I'm going to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely that you'll be here a year from now? And if they say something other than a 9 or a 10, then I fix what goes wrong. Other thing I'll say to them, and this I learned from a fellow EO member in New York, but he said, when I have a key player that I desperately want to hold on to, that I do not want to lose this person, he says, I will sit down with them and I'll say, look, you are an A player. I highly value you. So I want to ask you 2 favors, and in exchange, there's something I'm going to give you. First off, if you're ever unhappy here, if you're ever considering interviewing somewhere else, please come talk to me so I can make it right. Second, instead of 2 weeks notice, I want to ask you to give us at least a month notice, and in exchange, I'll extend your benefits for a month after you leave the company, right? And I never lost a single employee that I had that talk with. And look, it's like the people I didn't have that talk with, I lost some of them, but when they came and talked to me, I was like, sounds like you have a better opportunity. Best of luck. Let me know how I can help you. We'll go out to lunch, leave on good terms, right? But, you know, those A players, man, you've got to show them so much love. And I think, honestly, the A players, they appreciated my, like, love and adoration of them far more than the money, right? To know that you're needed and that you're valued, I feel like was key to helping build the team I had. And when I sold my company, and I don't know if this says good things about the way I ran the company or bad things, but when I sold the company, the average length of time that an engineer had been in my company was 5 years, which is quite a bit of time, you know, and these are all US engineers. And after I stepped down from my company, within 12 months, 100% of them were gone. And I'm not knocking on the company that bought my business, but what I'm saying is culture is something that you need to make very deliberate, and you need to, like, some people think it's like soft skills, but it's not. I mean, like Peter Drucker, famous strategist, he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you don't have culture, you're gonna lose. And that's a big part of what I do now in my work now. Like, I coach leaders, but most of what I do is I help leaders build great teams. Anyway, but that's a whole different topic.
I want to get to that. I want to know why you made your decision to exit Clearview, and then I want to talk about why you decided to be a coach and all the things that you're learning there and helping companies through.
Yeah, sure.
And do you have a question?
Can I ask a question about culture before we move to that? I'm fascinated by culture, and so you worked with engineers. When you're talking about culture with more analytical people, they have a hard time getting it or even crediting it. Like, it just seems like that's not important as long as we're getting the job done.
Yeah.
So how do you, as a CEO, convince your CTO that culture is important? How do you convince an analytical person that thing is important?
So instead of convincing him that culture is important, I would recommend you enlist him in building the culture that he wants to work in. So for example, my lead engineer, Eric, a dear friend of this day, his engineers, they had story points, they had sprints, they had stuff to get done. But on Fridays, they were allowed to build whatever they wanted for the product. So they thought something might be cool, they would build it, they'd present it to the team. Maybe they liked it, maybe they didn't, right? So it's like, just because people are analytical doesn't mean they're not going to find it appealing to have, it's just like, what's going to make the culture great to them? So, we had a culture in our company of like empathy was one of our core values. And one of our other core values was like perseverance. But anyway, so these values, it's like, okay, well, how do you equate these to the engineers? Like, what's going to make their job great in having these cultures be part of how they work, And so does that answer your question?
That is a great answer. Yes. And it helps me work through an issue that I'm going through right now. Okay. So thank you.
Glad to talk to you about that.
No, that is a great answer.
So your decision to exit and your decision to go into coaching and what you're learning from coaching.
Yeah. So as an entrepreneur, I love growth. I love challenges. Every time in my life when I've been stretched the most is when I've grown the most, right? I think back to one of my first massive periods of growth in my life was when I got, after a few weeks of language training in the MTC, I got thrown into the deserts of the Atacama Desert of Chile, right? And so it was like, you live here for the next 2 years, so you better learn to speak Spanish, right? Just rapid growth. When you put yourself in hard positions, you have to grow. And like I said, that first 5 years of growing Clearview Social was so much fun. But once we had built it to where we were doing multiple millions of dollars a year in recurring revenue, then it was kind of like, almost like it was becoming a job. Like, okay, well, how do we maintain 20 to 30% growth every year? Or how do we, it's like it was still challenging, but it wasn't terrifying in the same way. And it was just a lot harder to get traction, right? Like going from $1 million to $2 million was way easier than going from like 3 million to 5 million, And so here I am where it's like, this is frustrating. Like the business is pretty successful. And that's when I decided to move back to Utah. Cause I was like, you know what? I've been away from my family a long time. I'm going to open up an office in Utah, and maybe that will give me my fire back. Like maybe that will help me get excited about this business again. Then I moved out here, and then COVID hit. And so during COVID, we weren't like the e-commerce companies that exploded. Professional services, the first 6 months we contracted. I mean, we didn't contract. We actually just grew a little bit instead of we were used to always having double-digit growth. So we just grew a little bit for the first 6 months. And I was like, I wasn't having fun before, but now this isn't fun at all. And we had a couple of private equity people come and say, they were interested in buying it. And so it just was like, because the biggest reason I sold is, well, first off, I set out to build a company that someone would want to buy. So like that's success. And second off, like my growth had slowed, and I was like, I think I need a different challenge to keep growing personally. So that's the answer I have for you.
And so this has come full circle because you did consulting for lawyers, and now you're back to making a ton of money golfing every day and consulting. So why coaching?
Yeah, so it's interesting.
And what type? Let's go into a little bit. There's a lot of different types of business coaches. I'd love to hear a little bit specifically about what an EOS implementer is and what's different about that.
Yeah, so let me kind of tell you the story of how I ended up there, and then I'll tell you like what it is.
Cool.
Okay, so we're both members of EO, the entrepreneur organization, one of the largest entrepreneur organizations in the world, like 70 countries. Anyway, to join EO, your business has to do over $1 million a year. And when my business was just at $250,000 a year in Buffalo, I got invited to join EO's accelerator program. And so I had this wonderful coach there, Jamie Cornelson, who's still a dear friend of mine. And just as a volunteer, he helped me scale in basically about 12 months from about $300,000 a year to $1 million a year. It was a cool experience, and I thought, wow, I wonder if I'll ever be in a place where I can volunteer my time. Like, there's no way now, because this is when I was in my rapid growth phase. Like, there was no free time. Anyway, fast forward 4 years down the road, I was in Buffalo. My business, I'd been a member of EO for a few years, and I had moved to Salt Lake, and I got asked if I would just coach a small group of these accelerator students that were trying to grow to $1 million a year. And honestly, like, I had no idea. I was like, I think I have enough time now, but I had no idea if I would be any good at it. I was like, I knew I'd built my business.
That surprises me.
But I
saw you on the other side after crushing.
But I'd never done it before. And so, the first day we met with them, and we heard about, there's about half a dozen of them. I heard about their businesses. I gave them some ideas. I just gave my insights, right? I mean, I'd read like every business book, so I had some ideas for all of them. And then the next week they came back and the group got a little bit bigger. The next month. And then the month after that, I realized like, whoa, like this is really fun. Like I love this. And after doing it for a year, I was like, it was my favorite day every month. Like I just looked forward to being with these young, hungry entrepreneurs that like, I would say like, hey, like read this book. Hey, do this and report back to me. And they were just hungry. They were like sponges. They just do what I told them. I was like, this is amazing. This is nothing like coaching the lawyers who would like maybe 10% of them would do what I told them, And so the next year, my group had done so well, they asked me to run the whole accelerator program. And so I kept my group and grew it.
I think you graduated more accelerators to $1 million and into EO than any like by a factor of 2 or 3x whatever.
It was just so much fun. And so when I sold my company, I remember sitting with Clint Peterson, who runs Peterson Ventures, and I was just saying to him like, I was trying to get some perspective. I'm like, you've talked to a lot of people that have sold businesses, like give me some wisdom. And he asked me, he's like, do you really just want to go build another software company that's 10 times as big as your last company? And like, honestly, the thought of that like kind of made me like sick. Like, no, like I don't care about that. Like, I don't care. I've proven I can build a business, like I've made some money, and I just realized like my happiest day each month is helping these accelerator companies grow. Like, what if I did that every single day? And so I had used the entrepreneur operating system in my business. I was a big fan of Traction. Actually, at this time, I had a box of Traction in my trunk and would give it away to people when I met them randomly. I had no idea I was going to end up coaching using that framework. But I just thought, you know what? Even if I don't love being an EOS implementer and coaching teams on this, I'm going to go get certified. Like I'm going to go through their boot camp because if nothing else, it'll make me a better leader, a better coach going forward, And so I went to that boot camp and I don't know if I think I told you this story, but like my mindset going to the boot camp was like, once I graduate, maybe I'll get a couple clients, but like, I still want my freedom. Like, I don't want to go back to being as busy as I used to be. Right. And the last day of the boot camp, we had this MCE meeting with all the other implementers in the region. and they put this slide up on the screen with the records. And it was like, the fastest anyone's ever grown in their first 6 months is they've added, 10 new clients, 10 focus days. And I'm looking at that and I was like, I know 20 entrepreneurs right now that I think I could sign up. And so I was like, I'm going to beat that. So I got back and I just went all in. I went all in. And
how many did you get in the first 6 months?
Well, I broke the record. I got 11, and I got to 17 a few months after that. But it was just a ton of fun because I just loved the work. So unlike a coach that works one-on-one with someone, I bring the entire teams in for full days. So we do quarterly and annual meetings, but then there's kind of a ramp up phase. So the first 3 months, I spend a full day with them every month, helping companies build the foundation of like, what does it look like to have the right people in the right seat for your organization? What are your values? And I take them through exercises, how they can do that. I help them figure out, what is their 10-year target? Like, what's their big, hairy, audacious goal they want to accomplish? And anyway, and I've loved it. It's amazing. And people say like, well, will you ever go back to building a business? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I love entrepreneurship. I'll build another business. But right now, it's almost like we've talked before about the hero's journey, right? There's this hero's journey where you go from a place of comfort to discomfort as an entrepreneur, and you've got to like learn new skills and you've got to grow to be able to escape and come back out, and you come back out changed. And it's like that whole journey, the hero's journey is beautiful. But I think when I sold my company, I was kind of like a little bit exhausted. Like maybe I won't be a hero for like 15 minutes. Like maybe I'll be the guide that helps people through their hero's journey for a bit. And my kids are all at an age where I want to be home with them. I want to have dinner with my kids every night, right? And so like I do this work now because I feel like I can love these teams. I can build them up and help them so it's easier for them than it was for me. And then another business will come along, but that I'll build, I'm sure.
I have 2 more questions for you. Carlos, any more before I ask
I have
mine?
one more question.
Go ahead.
Adrian, we've had your guest number 23, and every person that we've had here has been extremely successful, and so are you. I'd love to know.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that was going. Yeah.
No, and you obviously are very successful. I'd love to know from you, what do you attribute your success to? What's your why?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's changed. So I grew up in a family of 5 boys, and I had 3 older brothers. And if I'm being like totally honest, like they were pretty terrible to me when I was little. And they were all brilliant, and they're all great artists. And I had a lot of confidence, even from a young age. I think that's partly why they were so hard on me, right? Because I could do things and talk to people in a way they couldn't. And so being just like immature kids, like they were, they would tease me, and, I was in tears a lot as a kid. And being in that position of feeling like I was like always less than just drove me from a young age to like achieve at a high level. And was that a good motivation? Well, it got me to success, but then I've talked about this pretty openly. Like when I sold my software company, it was like, like this little kid in me is like, look, brothers, like I am successful. Take that, right? But it's like, but I'm 40 years old. Like, why are these ghosts like still haunting me? And so then I've just, I've had a lot of personal work to do in figuring out like, I may have built this company to prove to myself something, like prove to myself that I was enough. But since then I've realized like, well, like I was always enough. And so now the question is like, whatever I do next, it's not about me. It's really about how can I find where I can have the best impact on the most people. And that's what motivates. That's what's motivating me now. And whatever I've accomplished, whatever success I've had in the past, I think will pale in comparison to what I can do in the future with this different perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll wrap up with one last question.
All right.
If you have your earlier version of Adrian, whether that's pre-law school, law school, clear view. What version is that, and what do you say to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the thing, I know that I can't like object to the question, but I'm going to object to the question. No, I'm just kidding. So the thing about those questions is I've been on this journey and there's been things for me to learn every step of the way, right? And so it's like I couldn't learn the lessons until I was ready. You know, the old saying, like, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. Like, I think, oh, if I could go back to the 30-year-old version of me and I could say, hey, don't try to win so much. Like, your brothers were just being idiots, right? Like, I don't think that would have served me at the time, you know? But I think the one thing I definitely would have said to myself when I was 20 years old is I would have said, I would have started way earlier asking people to mentor me. I think I waited until I was in my early 30s to ask people to mentor me and to look for coaches. I really wish I could tell the 20-year-old version of me, like, people will help you if you just ask. I don't know. That's all I got.
That's a great answer.
Adrian, thanks for being our Michael Jordan episode. So awesome to have you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thanks,
Thank you guys so much. It was a treat to be on here. Thanks,
This
guys.
was a great one. Thank you.
You've been watching Hello Grow, the world's #1 growth podcast. I'm Cortland Brady.
I'm Carlos Souza. If you've watched this video so far, it means that you like the content that we're putting out and the people we're interviewing.
We're putting together a community of business leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales leaders. You liking, subscribing, and sharing this content helps us reach those that are going on that journey.
If you want to be a part of this community, please subscribe, smash that like button, and turn on those notifications.